I suspect there's very little that parents can do to change the course of language development. And let me say, I'm not speaking about this from any expertise. There's nothing in linguistic theory that gives answers to this question. But experience suffices to indicate, I know cases, that you can create an environment in which a 5-year-old will sound like a college professor, and it's kind of comical, but they'll use big words and, complicated sentences and so on. I suspect you're probably harming the 5-year-old, but it's possible to do that. Children can be molded. On the other hand, if you just leave them alone, they're going to pick up the language of their culture. Typically, they'll pick up the language of their peers. There are exceptions, but typically children will learn the language they heard in the streets. So take me. My father spoke with a Ukrainian accent, and my mother spoke with a mixed New York Lithuanian accent, and I spoke urban Philadelphia because that's what the kids were talking in the streets. And undoubtedly, if you really took my speech patterns and so on aside, you'd find influences from the parents and the uncles and so on, but overwhelmingly, you pick up the peer culture. Why this happens, nobody knows, but there's something about humans, children, that gets them to grow the language that's roughly that of their peers. And it's a very rich system. It's an extremely rich system. They don't try. They can't prevent themselves from doing it. They can't make it happen. The parents can enrich anyone who has a 2-year-old knows that the kid is running around all over the place trying to find out what the name of everything is. What's that? And you can help them, and you can read the children and show them pictures, and they're all fascinated with it. They're in periods of very rapid language growth where you just can't satiate the curiosity fast enough. It's unbelievable, in fact. What actually happens is really astonishing. Forget the structure of language, which is complicated enough, but just take vocabulary acquisition, the simplest part. At peak periods of acquisition of vocabulary, learning new words, children are picking them up at maybe a rate of 1 an hour or something, which means that they're essentially learning a word on one exposure. But if you think what it means to learn a word on one exposure, the way to understand how amazing an achievement this is to try to define a word. What is the meaning of table, for instance? Nobody can do that. But you see, what we call definitions are not definitions, they're just hints. If you take the Oxford English Dictionary, the one you read with a magnifying glass, and they give you a long, detailed thing which they call the definition of a word. In fact, it's very far from the definition of a word. It's a few hints that a person who already knows the concept can use to understand what's going on. But remember, the child is picking that up not from the Oxford English Dictionary with its whole array of hints. The child's picking it up from seeing it used once or twice. Now, that can only mean one thing. It can only mean that the concept itself, in all of its richness and complexity, is somehow sitting there, waiting to have a sound associated with it. Now, that can't be quite true, but something very much like that is probably true. That's why you and I will have essentially the same concept of table and the same concept of person. We'll have that even though we all have very limited experience, because basically we started with those concepts.